this is Robert Merdlacci, the MindShare Learning, Port Canada's Learning and Technology e-magazine, and welcome to This Week in Canadian EdTech MindShareTV podcast. We have a very special edition in preparing for back to school. I'm honored to have joined me for a MindShare Learning moment, Eileen Belastock, who's a former CTO, CIO in the U.S. and in the Northeast. Eileen is an expert in EdTech and security, top 100 EdTech influencers. She talks about EdTech education, data privacy, cybersecurity, and strategic planning. She is a former accountant and finance expert as well, which brings an interesting hybrid perspective and an educator. That's Eileen. Thank you for joining me this morning, and looking forward to having you speak at our Canadian EdTech Summit in Montreal, October 19th and 20th.
So excited. It's nice to be here, Robert. It's been a long time since I've been on one of your podcasts, so I'm excited, and I'm excited to come to Montreal. I think that's going to be a fantastic event.
Well, you are going to certainly bring a lot to the equation when it comes to your expertise as an educator and a former CTO, and dealing with some of the most pressing challenges today, especially as we prepare for back to school and getting back to a sense of normalcy. You're ahead of us in the U.S. when I think Indiana started early August, and we have a couple of weeks left after Labor Day weekend. How are things going so far? Are schools pretty much going back as COVID free and mask free, or what's the sentiment like from your perspective?
Yeah, it's almost like business as usual. I think that a lot of states have kind of lifted all mandates regarding masks and distances. And, I read an article recently that only a quarter of schools are even looking at hybrid and virtual learning. So I think it's back to in-person learning. It's not going to be, I hate using the word the new normal.
Right.
But it's just that in-person learning where our kids thrive, most of our kids thrive, is raring to go. So
right, and having that tactile, project-based, interactive with EdTech tools. Let's talk about EdTech for a moment. It got a bit of a bad rap over COVID because of crisis learning not being so elegant, if you will. But the reality is, without EdTech, we wouldn't have had very much learning at all. We would have been shipping paper packages with worksheets, and that wasn't ideal either.
No, and it was more of triage at that point. And I think tech directors across the country have been very strategic in talking about the need for one-to-one devices, online learning for a long time. So the districts I talked to, they already were one-to-one. They already had a learning management platform. They had already been using software tools, and so I think for the most part, it's terrible that we got the bad rap, but I think we kind of saved learning during the remote learning time, because most of the districts had been foreseeing this and were actually pretty prepared to address all of a sudden everybody leaving the classroom and everybody going on to Zoom and Google Meet
Right.
day two. So.
Well, and so that kind of sparked the inspiration for the theme of our summit, driving innovation through evidence-based learning. And really, you as an educator as well, and former principal, in the trenches, really, making it happen, have a deep understanding of what works, and cutting through the clutter. I know Toronto District School Board licenses some 200 apps. Apparently, there's 12,000 out there. That's pretty overwhelming, especially as a new educator, as an example, going into a classroom today.
Yeah, it just, if I heard the word free one more time during the pandemic, less is always more. And I think
Right.
both districts and software companies are recognizing it, the service providers. They're trying to be that one-stop shop. So if you're using a product like, I'm going to say iReady, they
Right.
have the diagnostics, now they have the interventions, and now they're, looking to get some tutoring components of it. So they're looking to have less apps out there, but more robust programs that actually address, our struggling students to our high achievers. And that ties into data privacy.
Right.
The more apps you have out there, the more data you have out there, the more sign-ons you have out there. So I know, organizations like COSIN are doing a really good job of focusing on interoperability and making sure that all the programs actually intersect very well, and that we own the data, and that data isn't put out there. Much like there's been a few companies, software companies that just got hit by cybersecurity, and data from our students were out there because it was a third party application that was accessing it. So.
That's a really good point you hit it on, Eileen. Thank you so much for that. Now, Peter Singh from the TDSB alluded to, some 12,000 apps out there, and I know educators, like to be innovative, many of them, and try different products. But
Mhm.
when you're not going through the portal, there's liability issues and challenges there, and that they don't necessarily realize if there's a privacy breach.
No, and you know what? It's not their responsibility to be reading privacy agreements, and looking at all the legal uh, pieces of paper that are out there. Their job is to teach kids, and they want what's
Right.
best for kids. And I think some of the software companies are targeting teachers directly, offering them free or low cost
Right.
options. And that's been a struggle for districts. So those 1,200 that are apps that are out there, I may only realize that my teachers are using 300 of them. I don't realize
Right.
that they're using all these other ones. So it
Right.
just, it's that whole click wrap agreement when a teacher signs on their students onto an app and creates an account, they have to agree to the privacy and terms of agreement of these companies. So that makes them personally legal liable, um,
Right.
for if the data is compromised. Um,
Yeah.
if, students' faces are on these, programs, if their personal identifiable information's on there. So what districts are doing is really focusing on having a vetting process and having a procurement process, so that teachers don't have to worry about that. They would, as long as it was instructionally strategic for their classroom or the district or or their school. They work with the IT department to make sure that it's safe.
That
That it
makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and you know what? It's a culture change.
It
Um,
is.
a real big culture change, and I think software companies are realizing there's a no trust zone going on, and they can't get through the gate unless they go through the IT department.
Well, and that's a great segue to the next question for you around EdTech providers and what they could do better, because there is the interoperability uh, challenges and being compliant and aligning yourself with organizations like a COSIN and others that SIIA as well.
Yep.
Thoughts?
Yeah, I agree, and I think it starts with the salespeople. I'm finding that having conversations with salespeople, because they're the first ones that are going to come to you and
Right.
say, "Would you like to buy our product?" And I have a checklist. I had a checklist of, do you do this? Do you do that? And they're like, they don't know the answer. And I think so. It starts with training their salespeople to understand data privacy and PPI, and making sure that when they go out to sell a product, they completely understand it. I'm starting to work with companies from Canada and from Europe, and the United States has a very different model. We don't have a minister of education. Um,
Right.
we don't have every state and every district, as our commissioner of education just recently said, is, the governors hold the power in each of the states. And so a company can't come in, has to understand each state's data privacy regulations, each district's data privacy regulations, before they even do that cold calling or set up a meeting with CTOs, because we're pretty savvy on this.
Absolutely.
Um, so
And talk to me about professional learning. One of the things we recently did is created a course that we're launching at the summit is EdTech as a career option. There are a lot of educators looking to come into the space, and they don't have necessarily the insight or no one's doing any training. So we created that. But how important is it to faculties of education to really have those strategic partnerships? And I think partnerships are really vital going forward more than ever before, and help giving the tools to the faculties so that they're ready going into back to school, as an example, because there's a lot of tools that are out there that teachers, especially during the pandemic, it was like, building the plane as you fly it, if you will.
Totally true. And I think in some cases we didn't have the seatbelts. So, it was really, really, and that's the key to it, is constant education of our faculty and staff of, I always related to their personal information. So if they're on Facebook or Twitter, how what privacy settings do they have on there? Making sure that, they have them on their software that they're using, making sure they understand that when they share personal information about a student via a video, via a software program or whatever it is, they're actually putting the child's future credit in jeopardy. And when you make it personal to them, they totally get that. But it's a big shift from I want control to now you're telling me what to do. So I think it's more about education and collaboration and partnering with the teachers, and administrators too, because this is not something on their radar all the time either. So,
Right.
but not a top down, we have to do this, you have to know this, and not a once a year, beginning of the school year, along with your ethics test you have to take to be able to take some kind of cybersecurity or data privacy test. It has to be constantly talked about and constantly reinforced with teachers.
Fascinating. What gives you hope for the future of learning, especially this year?
I think learning has completely changed. Whether it's in person, whether it's online, I think we've given students agency, and students are figuring out the best way that they learn. And I think the pandemic did that for our students. I think teachers don't need to be standing up in front of the classroom all the time. They have more opportunities in the classroom with iPads and Chromebooks to actually have kids work in small groups on projects, expand their environment to the global world, the global educational field, and actually have conversations like this, Zoom. I mean, these kind of environments have done amazing things to expand our children's horizons. So, industry as well as colleges are looking for critical skills, critical thinking,
Right.
problem solving, collaboration. A quick story: when I was a calculus teacher, there's a fourth year of math. These are my bright students. And I said, so here's the problem. I want you to solve it. And they're like, what formula should I use? And I'm like, you've been taking math for a long time. Tell me what works best for you to solve this problem. And once they get past that uncomfortableness, they found that the best way to
Right.
get them to learn. And I think that's what we're seeing even with our smallest children, our smallest students. So that's what I think our students are going to thrive.
Well said. Well, with that, Eileen, thank you so much for your time this morning. Looking forward to hosting you in Montreal, October 19th and 20th at the Canadian EdTech Leadership Summit.
I am so excited. I'm so excited. Thank you for having me. I always love talking with you and about ed tech. So thank you very much.
My pleasure. That was Eileen Belastock, expert in EdTech, former CTO, who will be joining us October 19th and 20th at the MindShare EdTech Leadership Summit. My name is Robert Mardlacci, the MindShare Learning Report. Be sure to check out www.MindShare Learning to get your latest issue. And until next time, stay healthy, stay safe, and keep the learning curve steep.